Welcome to Learn Python 3 the Hard Way, exercise 15, where we finally get to a new thing. So you've been doing a lot of printing and input, printing. Now we're getting into input. So we've done input and argv, and now you're going to learn about reading files. So the code for this is very simple, but we're starting to get into a kind of a new thing, which is opening text files with this open function. And I haven't really gotten too much into functions. You've sort of been using them, but you don't know about them yet. We'll learn that pretty soon. But just think of functions as telling Python to do new stuff. It's like print, open, and then you can also tell things in Python to do stuff. That's what the dot does. So you're telling this txt thing to read itself. Now, I thought what I would do is I would show you a way to think about files that helps with some of the confusion. So files typically they have a very strange sort of interface. A lot of people want to think of files as a giant piece of data, and you can go from one part to another. The truth is, files are actually strange. You have to read them, and then you have to seek to a certain part, and then you have to rewind them. You have to truncate them. It's kind of a weird sense, or a set of words for people who are used to, playing files off of the internet, videos, things like that. So what I was going to do was show you that a lot of the words for what we do with files comes from the past. These here are old tape drives for mainframes. And the tape drive was the original way that I think there were others before, but I think the tape was the main one. And if I zoom in on this one, we can take a look. Let's expand that out maybe later. Okay, yeah, so here we can zoom in. So what you see is this two spindles. Now, some people who are younger may have never even seen a tape at all. Other people might have seen cassette tapes. So cassette tapes you could put in your car back in the 80s, almost up to the 90s probably. And the tape goes around that spindle, goes through here, and there's a read head. And that read head reads the data, and then it spools over to the other one. So early computers, giant mainframes, had to have a way to store data, and we didn't quite have things like hard disks, and now we've got SSDs. Those are basically giant chunks of memory we can store. What they did is they wrote the data, and I'm not kidding, as kind of like sound. It would be like static. And they would encode it into the tapes. And eventually they figured out they didn't need to do that, and they made it a little more, computerized. But for the most part, you had a tape, and you basically wrote complicated sounds to the tape, and you had to read them. Now, if I've got a tape, I can't take, say, the center of this spool. Say I want to go to the middle of this. I'm at the beginning. I'm going to go to the middle of it. I can't just jump to it. I have to actually wind the tape. I have to fast forward. I have to seek ahead. I have to seek forward until I find the spot I need. Then I tell the read head to start reading. And the read head starts reading. The tape keeps advancing. So I get to a certain point in the tape. And then when I'm done, if I want to go back up, say, to the beginning, I have to rewind the tape. So that's why a lot of the terms may be unfamiliar to some people. They come from old tech like this, mainframes. So let's see if we can what else can we do? So these tapes, and the interesting thing is the tape drives didn't store much. I mean, I'm not sure how much RAM or how much this stored, but I'm going to say it's in the megabytes maybe. So your phone, if you have a phone these days, has 64 gigabytes, right? So if you want to do the math, this had maybe 5 megabytes. So your phone could store an insane number of these giant tape drives. And if I remember right, humans had to store these tapes and come over and load them sometimes. So they might get full, so they had to load them and unload them and then store them somewhere. And yeah, it was very, very complicated. So tape drives, these things, combined with printers. So a lot of your stuff that you and you know what? Let me just do that. Let's do this. So let's look for, let's see. Mainframe printers. We might find, yeah, I mean, I think we can even find older ones than this. Ah, perfect. There we go. So these are the printers that mainframes used. And so a lot of the printing, a lot of the things when you think of a terminal, you know, like you're doing, here, let me go back. So code that says print this, and, you know, like the terminal moves forward. And do you remember the escape codes, like \V, which is a vertical tab, and it did nothing in PowerShell, right? All of those things also come from the history of mainframes printing on this thing. So this would probably be, it's either going to be a dot matrix printer, which would have actual like pins, and the pins would push into a ribbon of like a typewriter ribbon, or it's going to be like a typewriter head. If you know those typewriters, the Selectric, I think it was called, and it had a ball, and on the ball was words, and it would go dunk, 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 dunk. And so what would happen is all the things you wanted to do, and this is before you had screens. So this is back in the day when they didn't really have even computer screens. What they would do is they would print to the printer, and that was your screen. And so you would go print my file, go no, and print it all out. So much of programming today still works this way. It still works with almost the idea that it's printing to a printer, and there's not been a lot of modernization in how that works. So when you're running into something strange, there's a really good chance that it comes from some ancient piece of technology like this dot matrix printer here. Here's another one. And now we use laser printers, and we use, a lot of times we don't even print anymore. Like I think if someone asks me to print something and fax them, they're in the dark ages. But a lot of what you get from the APIs are sometimes just legacy leftovers from when we used to do things with mainframes. And then programmers forgot that they forgot that that's why they were doing it that way. So then we don't have to think about like files that way anymore, but we still do. And there's some handy reasons for doing this, but nowadays there's not much of a difference between a file on your disk and a file in the computer's memory. You, in theory, should be able to randomly access either of them, and it doesn't really matter. What I mean by randomly access is you shouldn't have to read and then rewind and seek and all that stuff. You should just be able to treat it like it's a piece of text. But these abstractions, which is what we call them, do help with processing things when you're starting out, if you understand that the concept comes from some old idea. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to review this file really quick. So we've got the usual argv, that's no big deal. We're going to be opening a text file, okay? And then we've got open. Now, on some people's computers, you might have to do this, where you do encoding equals UTF-8. Okay, you might have to do that if you get sort of like a weird encoding error. And maybe I'll try to make that error happen as our break it step. But for now, we're just going to do this. And then once we have the open and it becomes this txt variable, we can work with that anywhere we want. So now we can do read. Okay, and what that does is think of a tape. We're at the beginning of the tape. We just loaded the tape up. We're going to read the whole tape into the program, and then we print it out. And then we ask for the file again, so you can see I don't need to have, I'm teaching you combination. I can do argv, or I can do input. The two are totally unrelated to how I use files. And again, I'm teaching that because a lot of people, they'll learn to use argv with files, and they won't make the leap to, oh, well, I can use input with files. I can use other files with files, and so on. And then it prints it again. It's very simple. So let's go try that out. I'm going to make a quick text file. You know what? Actually, yeah, let me just do this. I was going to show you something fancy, and then let's just save it there as test.txt. Really simple. And we're going to do Python ex15.py test.txt. Okay, so there, it printed it out, and then we can do, now I don't have to do test.txt, but I'm going to. Okay. Now let me show you something interesting. I can do ex15.py. So the Python script just opened itself and printed it out. So try to wrap your head around that. For some people, that seems to be magic. It's not, though. The Python script is a text file, and I can tell Python to open text files. So there you go. And let's do ex14.py. See? Pretty straightforward. So now you know how text files work and how to open them. What you can do is go in and try to break these text files. Okay, so if I try to, let's see, yeah. So here's one thing. Try this. Teaching you a little bit ahead of time, but if you try that one, txt.close, you're going to get that kind of error. IO operation on closed file. So play around with some of the things you can do to make this thing barf. That's one example. You could give it a bad file name. Let's try that. Let's try this. Get rid of that. No such file or directory. That's another way you can break it. So there's a lot of opportunities to break stuff in here. Give it a shot. Try and break it. Another one is take the file and put some text that's not standard, say UTF-8 text. Maybe it's a little more advanced, but we will get into it later. But see if you can find some text online. Try like a language, like I know a lot of times you can find files in Chinese or Japanese that will use their own encoding. Say you might be able to do big 5, big 6, KOI 8. See if you can find some text like that, put it in a file, and see what this does when it runs into it. All right, that's exercise 15. See you at 16.